Hello and welcome back for some more Seattle Kraken expansion draft speculation. And if you've been following along with this series to this point, you may have already figured out who we're going to be talking about today. Although it is also in the title, thumbnail, and description, but it is also the last Western Conference team that we have not talked about to this point, and also one of the biggest surprises to this point in the season, that being the Chicago Blackhawks. By the way, if you do find yourself enjoying this video at any point and you like to do that kind of thing, the subscribe button down there can probably help you out. Now, even after a surprising upset of the Oilers in the play-in round of last year's playoff bubble, not a lot of people thought that the Blackhawks were gonna be all that competitive this season. And that was even before they lost a number of their key players, even before the season started. So as they are now 32 games into a 56-game season and currently sit in a playoff spot, that is definitely a surprise to most. But while that and the surprising emergence of Kevin Lankinen in goal may be the things that the Blackhawks fans are most excited about at this moment, to Seattle, it really doesn't matter all that much how the Blackhawks perform this season. All that matters is who they leave exposed in the expansion draft. But when it does come to that, unfortunately for the Kraken, because the Blackhawks have been in a bit of a rebuilding mode for the last couple of seasons, they do have a number of players on the younger end that will be exempt for this expansion draft, which includes names like Dominique Kubalik, Kirby Dach, and also Pius Suter, among plenty of others. Fortunately though, while that certainly will limit the number of options that might be tempting for the Kraken, there still will be some players worth picking up. But first, let's talk about the guys that will end up being protected. Now, at least right now anyway, I don't think it's fully out of the question that the Blackhawks still could go the 8-skater or 4-4 protection route, but I still do see it being much more likely that they go the 7-3 route because, again, they are still kind of trying to rebuild and would probably rather protect more guys. So then when it comes to those 7 guys I would see them protecting on the forward end, well, that would obviously include names like Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, who, even outside of their no movement clauses, would be locks to be protected anyway, as well as Alex DeBrincat, Dylan Strome, and David Kampf I all think are pretty likely to end up being protected. And then when it comes down to that 7th and final protection slot, I originally had Lucas Wallmark taking that one, but I actually think that Brandon Hagel might be earning his way into this spot, and I'm actually going to give him the nod for it right now. And of course, it may also be worth mentioning that Kampf, Hagel, and Wallmark are all set to be RFAs at the end of the season, but considering the Blackhawks don't have a whole ton of forwards signed for 2022, I would expect some of these guys to start getting extensions before the expansion draft. Then again, maybe not. Maybe the Blackhawks decide to roll the dice a bit and don't extend any of them before the expansion draft, which I guess is also a possibility considering the amount of young talent that they have that will be exempt for the draft that will be under contract for 2022. Either way though, at least right now anyway, it may be the defensive end that Seattle's looking a little bit more closely at when it comes to picking a player from the Blackhawks. And when it comes to the 3 guys that will be protected on that end, again, assuming they go 7-3, well, both Brent Seabrook and Duncan Keith are under no movement clauses, so they would have to be protected. Now, of course, with that being said, a couple of weeks ago, the news did come out that Brent Seabrook has announced that his playing days in the NHL are over due to injury. So while nothing is still official on the expansion draft front, and if it were to happen right now, then he would still have to be protected because of that no movement clause, it is pretty likely that he will end up exempt due to a career-ending injury. And so because of that, I think it's pretty safe to say that he will not be on this protection list one way or another, which does mean that now the Blackhawks have room to protect both Connor Murphy and Nikita Zadorov. And then, of course, when it comes to the protected goaltender, well, coming into the season, it looked pretty likely that that would be going to Colin Delia, but at least as of right now anyway, it seems pretty clear that it will be Kevin Lankinen that gets that protection spot. So then as we do start getting to the players that could be available for the Kraken to select from, we are going to have to talk about a couple of RFA and UFA players because, again, as of right now anyway, Chicago doesn't have a whole lot of draft-eligible guys on the forward end that are under contract for next season. Now, they do have to have 2 such players, but Ryan Carpenter and Matthew Highmore fill that role for them, neither of which I think are particularly tempting options for the Kraken to select. That means that if no one is re-signed, probably the most tempting option on the forward end is whichever one of Wallmark or Hagel doesn't end up getting protected. Both are set to be RFAs, so Chicago could end up just playing the same game of chicken with them that we talked about with Zadorov just a second ago. But while that certainly would make them less tempting for the Kraken to select, it doesn't mean that they can't, so let's talk about them real quick. And we might as well start with the guy who, at least to me, right now seems to be losing his grip on that 7th protection slot in Wallmark. The 25-year-old center has played in at least part of 5 different NHL seasons, having played in 183 games where he has 49 points on 23 goals and 36 assists. So he certainly doesn't have a crazy amount of points production to his name, but so far to this point in his career, he's definitely been utilized more as a puck possession and physical type of forward. And his best year for that definitely came in his last full year in Carolina in the 2018-19 season. Now, that being said about his points production, he did seem to be on the uptick last year with 25 points on 12 goals and 13 assists in the 67 games that he got in before the COVID stoppage. And it probably is some kind of mix of that half a point per game points production that he showed last season, as well as the physicality and puck possession ability that he showed the season before, that the Blackhawks were hoping to get out of him when they acquired him before this current season. And while at least so far that physical part of his game definitely does seem to have kind of come back a little bit, he does only have 3 points on 3 assists in 16 games so far to this point in the season. On top of that, his Corsi stats at least don't look particularly good, where he has a 45.1 percentage there. So with Wallmark, it certainly still may be too early to tell exactly what he could become, but for Chicago, with guys like Dak and Suter coming up behind him, he might not be given the opportunity to get to his full potential. And it's partly for that reason, as well as the production that Hagel has been able to have so far to this point this season, that make me think he might be a little bit less likely to get protected at this point than Hagel. For Hagel, he certainly is a little bit more of an unknown, having only played in one NHL game before this season, which was last year. But after having been a 6th round draft pick by the Sabres in 2016, so far to this point this season, he has 10 points on 3 goals and 7 assists in 29 games. So at least this year anyway, he certainly has proved that he is NHL worthy. And again, at least so far with his limited NHL experience anyway, when it comes to him versus Wallmark, it doesn't seem like he gives up a whole lot when it comes to the physical part of his game either. Even if his advanced stats don't really seem to offer a whole lot, but again, he doesn't have all that much to draw from, so it's hard to say how much that really is representative of his play. So with him certainly showing Chicago a little bit more as far as production is concerned in this current season over Wallmark, as well as being 3 years younger, that's why I kind of am leaning more Hagel getting this protection slot over Wallmark. And honestly, if Hagel can keep this up and somehow Chicago decides to leave him exposed, even if he is still an RFA at that point and they haven't extended him, I wouldn't hate the idea of Seattle maybe taking a chance on this guy, even if that is not something that the Kraken end up doing a whole lot of. The only other guy on the forward end that I could maybe see be tempting for the Kraken to pick would be Matthias Janmark. Now, Janmark is set to be UFA at the end of the season, and while I do think that the Blackhawks probably would want him back for next year, considering how he's been playing this season, I don't know that they want him back bad enough to extend him before the expansion draft, especially considering that probably means that they would have to protect him if they didn't want to lose him. Which does mean that if in fact he isn't extended by the time the expansion draft rolls around, while Seattle could still take him, he is much less tempting as a UFA than as an already signed player for next year. And while he is currently having his best career season in the NHL with 18 points in 32 games on 10 goals and 8 assists to this point, I just don't know that at the age of 29, which he will be next year anyway, that it would really be a chance worth taking for the Kraken. Meanwhile, on the defensive end, contract status aside, if either Connor Murphy or Nikita Zadorov are available, they are certainly the Kraken's best option. But of course, with that being said, once again, because of the fact that Seabrook is very likely not going to be on this protection list and probably won't even be draft eligible due to that career-ending injury, I do think it's pretty likely that both Murphy and Zadorov do end up protected. But either player, if exposed, would offer a very strong physical option that would slot in very well on maybe a second pair defense type of role for the Kraken. And even if one of these guys were to be available, it would probably be Zadorov without an extended contract, which, because he's set to be an RFA at the end of the season, would probably make him a little bit less tempting of an option for the Kraken. But even if that does turn out to be the case, there still are a couple more options on the defensive end. Starting with Calvin DeHaan. Another former first-round pick, DeHaan has also played what is basically 8 seasons in the NHL. In that time, he has played in 438 games, where he has 108 points on 15 goals and 93 assists. So again, another player that you're probably not necessarily looking at if you're looking for offensive production. But again, what he lacks there, he makes up for in physicality and getting in the way of frozen rubber on the defensive end, where in both categories he has over 2 a game over the course of his career, with 917 hits in those 238 games and 934 block shots. But while again, at least from a points production standpoint, he doesn't offer a whole lot more than the two previous players, he does have much better looking advanced metrics than they do, with a Corsi for percentage over the course of his career that is north of 50, and an expected plus minus that, instead of being in the negative 20s, is a positive 26. So all in all, career-wise, DeHaan might seem like he's almost an interchangeable player with the other two, and in some ways, maybe even slightly better. But his downside to those other two is, one, he is a little bit older as he's getting close to 30, and the other, and probably more important one, is the fact that he has had a bit of an issue with injuries over the last few years. But if he is able to stay healthy and the Kraken think that they can keep him healthy, he might be a pretty good option. And most importantly, he is actually under contract for 2022. Plus, although he is a left-handed shot like Zadorov as well, he does have experience on both the right and left side defensively, which that amount of flexibility for an expansion team would also be a pretty big plus. The final guy, at least to me, worth looking at here would be Lucas Carlsson, who probably would be the more tempting option if the Kraken do decide that they want to go more the younger route when it comes to picking a player from the Blackhawks. At 23 years old, Carlsson doesn't have a whole lot of NHL experience, having played in just 18 games, 16 of those so far this season. In that time, he has just 2 points on 2 assists, but again, he doesn't have a huge sample size, so it's really hard to say what he'll look like at the NHL level at this point. But at least over the last 2 seasons, where he played mostly at the AHL level with the Rockford Ice Hogs, he was nearly a half a point per game type of player, so at least from an offensive standpoint, if he can translate some of that or most of that to the NHL level, then he could offer quite a bit more when it comes to offensive production than any of the other guys we've talked about. Once again, and for the last time this video, when it comes to Carlsson, he too is set to be an RFA at the end of the season, so whether or not he is even a potential option for the Kraken probably comes down to whether or not he's extended, because if he's not, I don't think that they really think about it too heavily. Finally, when it comes to goaltenders, although D'Elia probably will be available at this point, I don't think that he's tempting enough of an option for the Kraken to take him over some of the other guys that will be exposed in this draft. So for the Blackhawks and which player the Kraken could potentially get from this team, like a lot of the other teams in the NHL at this point, a lot of that will come down to which players end up getting extended before the expansion draft. But as things stand right now, I do think that probably the best option, if the Kraken are willing to maybe go for one of the RFA guys and give them a contract, Zadorov, if available, would probably be a pretty good pick. If Connor Murphy is available, he, I think, would be a pretty easy pick. And if neither of those are the option, then Calvin DeHaan is probably the guy that I would go with here. As far as any potential deals or trades that the Blackhawks could offer the Kraken, I don't think it's terribly likely we see one with this team. Again, really the only incentive that they would have had would have been to try and get rid of Seabrook's contract. But if in fact he does have a career-ending injury, which again, that's what he said, then he would probably end up being exempt and they couldn't deal him anyway. Plus, I do think that they have enough flexibility with expiring contracts and young guys coming up that they really don't have all that much incentive as far as being afraid of who they could lose. All of which for a team that, while right now is surprisingly in the playoff hunt, still seems to be maybe on the upswing of their rebuild, probably is not something they go out of their way to do. So with that said, if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below. Otherwise, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Blackhawks, who you think they'll protect, and who you think could end up in Seattle down in the comment section. Otherwise, stay safe out there and be good to each other. Peace.